All right, so today I'm talking about books that, yeah, weren't my thing. Not that they were bad books, but maybe they just weren't like my favorite thing ever. But that I'm still glad that I read them, and I'm going to give you the reasons why, and then you can start to think about like, oh, well, do I want to read outside of my comfort zone? Do I want to, kind of explore things a little bit more, and kind of something like that? Because these are where I kind of find these books are where I'm. I'm trying new things and I find out that they're not my thing. And that's okay. And it's good to know. So I'll just start and then it will become more clear what I'm talking about. So the first book I'm going to talk about is Pachinko. Now, Pachinko is all about, oh gosh, how do you describe it? It's a thick book. It's a really big book. It's really long. There's a lot going on, but it basically is the life of this Korean woman who moves to Japan. And it's the interpersonal relationships, and then of course the stress of being in another country and having to learn the language and all that kind of stuff, which totally resonated with me. I understand what that's like. And it starts, I think, like before the Korean War, definitely before World War II, but it also was kind of a bit vague. Like I didn't feel like I got as much information as I needed to fully understand what was going on. I mean, not that what was going on, but like the bigger picture. Like I knew details of this woman's life, everyday struggles that she was having and the family at large, but I didn't get a really good sense of like the wider world and what was happening and like why other stuff. They're like, oh, you can't go back there because people disappear. So it was kind of a bit vague on that. And then the second half, it kind of veered off and we get bits and pieces of other people's lives that are like tangentially related to the main character. And so it's a little bit, yeah, and like nothing is happy. And I really like happy books, and this one just really wasn't. So it was very interesting. It was well written. If you have an interest in Korea, Japan, their history, maybe the conflicts between the two, this could be a very interesting book for you. All right, book number 2 on my list of books that I am glad that I read, but I didn't like them, is The Miniaturist. So I picked up The Miniaturist because it's set in Amsterdam, and if you don't already know, I live in the Netherlands, not too far from Amsterdam, and so I try to pick up any book that I can find that's set in the Netherlands. This one's set in like the 1600s, so the golden age in the Netherlands, and so a lot of books are set then because actually a lot was happening before and after. Not so much. And this one has some magic realism. It was well written. The characters are interesting. And like everything about it is good. Like I can't fault it. It's a good book, but it's not a happy one. Like everyone is miserable in this book. And that kind of makes me miserable. Like I am very affected by the stories when someone's having a bad time. And so I was very affected by it. Again, it was well written. It was very interesting. It was informative. I have a little bit more knowledge about the Netherlands in the 1600s and the culture and the context and like where women would have been available to do things and where they couldn't, and the views on homosexuality and stuff like that. Very interesting. A touch of magic realism in there. So it's a great book. It just wasn't happy, and that's my main gripe with it. So I'm glad that I read it. I've got that knowledge base now, but I'm not going to read the second one because I just don't want to be depressed again. On to book 3, right? Book 3. Okay, book 3 for me is The Midnight Library. And I know that a lot of people are like, oh, this is such a great book, and I loved it and everything. And it's not that it's depressing. It is a bit depressing. You got to go into it knowing that. It's a bit depressing. But The Midnight Library, it's this young woman. She dies by suicide at the beginning of the book, and then she ends up at the Midnight Library, and it's kind of a way for her to see all the options of what she could have done with her life. And you know what? I'm older. I'm 42. I've already gone through that like 25-year-old existential crisis of what am I doing with my life? This is great enough. And at that point, I read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. So I feel like that was the book, maybe 20 years ago was The Alchemist to read, and now The Midnight Library is the book to read if you're kind of like searching for the meaning of life and stuff like that. So it wasn't that it was a bad book. It was a little bland for me just because that wasn't what I needed at this point in my life. I was kind of like, oh yeah, I've already dealt with this mental trauma and these issues. I've surpassed that. I'm moving on. But if you are, kind of having a moment where you're not sure how your life is going to turn out, and that you're feeling regret about stuff and wishing that things had been different, then maybe it would be a really great book for you to read and then kind of get more perspective on life. But for me, it wasn't the book that I needed at that moment. It was just like a vaguely entertaining book, and then not even that, because I just kind of was disengaged and I thought she was a little bit whiny, the main character. So again, I'm glad I read it. It was, one of those references, and that as a bookseller, I can recommend it to people or not recommend it to people based on their information that they give me. So I'm glad that I read it. But again, just not my thing. Okay, book number 4 is Everything is Fucked. This is a nonfiction book, and it's called Everything is Fucked, basically, a book about hope. And so I thought, oh, okay, this is going to be a hopeful book, and it's going to, give me some pointers on like how to be more hopeful and what to look forward to or something like that. It wasn't. It was basically like, everything is so bad, you should be hopeful. So I ended up just feeling a little tricked. I guess they were straight up front with it, like that everything is pretty messed up right now in the world. And I should have known that, and I should have just gone with that. But it said a book about hope, so then I thought, like, I don't know. So it was a popular book. It landed in my lap. I read it, and I'm glad that I read it. It had some really interesting information. There's a lot of like science and research that they talk about in the book. But at the end of the day, it was like, wow, this does not leave me as hopeful as I was hoping it would. So take it with a grain of salt. If you're actually looking for something to be hopeful about, if you actually need some like good feel-good books, then actually I would go back to the Midnight Library, and Matt Haig, the author of that, has other books called like The Comfort Book and Reasons to Stay or something like that. So those books are definitely more happy if you feel that you need positive reinforcement in your life. If don't go with Everything is Fucked. No. The last book on my list of books that I am glad that I read but I didn't like is None of This Is True. And this is a mystery thriller. And I'll say the writing was great. I was on the edge of my seat. But the reason that I didn't like it was that it had like a super ick factor the whole time. Like scene 1, I was just creeped out. Like this was just bleh. It was very interesting. It was well written. It was, a good book. But for me, the creepiness factor and like the way that one of the characters acts and that, it just kind of made me feel gross most of the time. So if you like that, if you like those page turner thrillers, then it's a really good one. But for me, it was just like too much, and it wasn't my thing. So those are the books that I didn't enjoy personally, but maybe you really liked or you would really like based off of my description of them, which I know wasn't the most flattering. But so are there any books that you are glad that you read, but that you maybe wouldn't recommend or that you would never read again? Leave them in the comments, and like and subscribe if you want to learn more about books that make me feel a little icky.